No one in the Nevada Valley could have predicted how quickly everything would change that night. The day had ended with the sun sinking behind jagged mountains, leaving the desert in its usual peaceful hush. In the distance, the wild mustangs grazed beneath a sky bruised with gathering clouds. But Sable, a deep brown mare with a proud black mane, sensed something in the air. A tension, a subtle warning that set her heart thumping even as she munched on tough desert grass. Then, as dusk bled into night, the first drops of rain began to fall, cool and sharp against her hide. At first it was nothing. A little rain was common in spring, even in Nevada, but soon the rhythm grew frantic. The sky split open with a roar, thunder cracking like ancient trees being torn apart. Lightning danced along the ridges. Sable lifted her head, ears pricked, nostrils flaring, unease spreading through the herd. The older stallion snorted, urging the mustangs to move toward higher ground. But the earth was already shifting beneath their hooves. Within minutes, a distant rumble became a rushing wall of water. The valley's shallow creek, usually a trickle, had become a monster. Fueled by flash floodwaters barreling down from the high country, it surged across the land with a violence none had seen before. Sagebrush and tumbleweed vanished under a churning torrent. Sable barely had time to react before the flood struck the herd, scattering them like leaves before a hurricane. She bolted, muscles straining, hooves churning mud. Panic took over as she struggled against the relentless current. Around her, animals cried out. Coyotes, rabbits, and deer swept along in the chaos, their sounds lost in the roar of water. Suddenly, a floating log crashed into her side, spinning her around, plunging her beneath the filthy, icy torrent. Sable fought to keep her head above water, her powerful legs flailing desperately. Branches and trash tangled in her mane. Another surge smashed her against a fence post, then dragged her away from the familiar ground and her beloved herd. Everything became a dizzying, freezing blur. Dark water, broken fences, shards of houses torn from their foundations. Somewhere in the storm, she heard the high, panicked cries of foals, the bellow of a bull, and the shouts of humans battling to save what little they could. Sable's world shrank to survival. Her lungs burned, her vision narrowed. She searched for anything solid, someplace to rest, to fight the exhaustion that threatened to pull her under for good. A shape loomed ahead, half submerged but unmoving. A house, its roof jutting above the water like a lonely island. With her last burst of strength, Sable lunged toward it, her hooves scrabbling against shingles slick with rain and silt. The roof creaked, threatened to give way but held. She heaved herself up, collapsing in a trembling heap atop the narrow peak. For a long moment she lay there, chest heaving, nostrils wide, eyes wild with fear. Rain pelted her back, streaming down in sheets. The wind howled, rattling loose gutters and making the whole house tremble beneath her. All around, floodwaters surged, swirling with wreckage. Furniture, trees, fences, and the twisted shapes of ruined lives. The night was filled with chaos. The valley transformed into a nightmarish sea. Sable struggled to stand, legs shaky, hooves slipping on the wet roof. The tiles were sharp and unfamiliar beneath her weight, and the house groaned beneath her. She called out, a wild, desperate whinny, hoping for an answer from her herd, her mother, anyone. But there was only the scream of the wind and the endless rising water. Her body shivered, muscles aching from cold and terror. Each breath felt like ice, stabbing her lungs. Somewhere far off, she thought she saw distant flashlights, the faint call of human voices carried by the storm, but she could not tell if it was real or the feverish hope of a desperate animal. As hours passed, Sable drifted between fear and exhaustion, her mind replaying the chaos over and over. She remembered the foal swept past her, the cries for help, the rolling black wave that had separated her from everything she'd ever known. She listened for the comfort of hooves, the reassuring scent of her mother, but there was nothing but wet wood and the metallic tang of fear. Gradually, the water rose higher, lapping at the roof's edge. The house beneath her trembled, and Sable pressed her body as flat as she could, terrified of slipping off into the swirling blackness. Debris bumped against the walls. Now and then, distant sirens cut through the storm, their wails echoing over the water, but they faded quickly, swallowed by the wind. At some point, the rain lessened, turning from a torrent to a miserable drizzle. The darkness seemed absolute, but somewhere beyond, the world kept turning. Sable's eyes closed and opened, as she fought sleep, hunger, and the endless cold. Every muscle ached. Still, she endured. She was wild. She was a survivor, and in the middle of the drowned world, she refused to give in. By the time the first hint of dawn painted the clouds with ghostly silver, Sable was still there, alone and shaking on her island of shattered dreams, a silent witness to the valley's darkest night. She could not know what was coming, only that hope, if it existed at all, would have to find her here on the roof, where the wild and the ruined world collided. As dawn fought its way through the clouds, the flooded valley slowly revealed its devastation. Broken trees, shattered fences, and upside-down cars floated in brown, swirling water. The once quiet Nevada neighborhood looked like the scene of a war. Barely a roof poking out here, the edge of a porch there, everything else consumed by the churning river that now ruled the land. Rescue teams had been at work since before sunrise, scrambling to reach the stranded and the injured. Their yellow inflatable boats zigzagged between half-submerged houses, guided by radio static, shouted orders, and the desperate cries of people waving from second-story windows. Every so often, a wild animal would leap onto dry land, only to disappear just as quickly, driven by panic and fear. Elena Carter stood at the edge of a parking lot now turned boat launch, her gray hair plastered to her cheeks by wind and rain, eyes squinting at the scene before her. She wore her battered fire department jacket, the patch barely legible, but there was no mistaking her authority or her determination. Retirement hadn't dulled her spirit. Elena had spent decades running into burning buildings and pulling people from wrecks. She was no stranger to chaos. A shout went up from one of the volunteers, a young man with binoculars perched on the hood of a truck. "There's something moving on that roof. Looks big." His voice cut through the wind, sending a ripple through the huddled rescuers. Elena moved fast, pushing her way to the front. The binoculars were thrust into her hands. She steadied them, peered through the streaked lenses, and there, through the rain, she saw it. Not a person, but a horse, a Mustang, muscles bunched with fear, mane matted and dark with water. The animal's body trembled atop the battered shingles, its eyes wild and wide, as if it might leap at any second. "Who's got a line on that address?" Elena barked, her voice hoarse but commanding. "We've got a live animal stranded on a roof. She won't last much longer up there. We need to move now." There was hesitation. Most of the crew were volunteers, not animal specialists. Someone muttered, "Ma'am, that's a wild horse. Could be dangerous. Shouldn't we?" Elena spun on her heel. She's not dangerous. She's terrified. And if we don't do something, she'll drown or die of shock before animal control even gets here. I've handled worse. Trust me. After a flurry of nervous glances and quick exchanges over the radio, Elena found herself climbing into a rescue boat with two volunteers, Marcus, a paramedic, and Josie, a high school biology teacher turned animal advocate for the day. Their boat cut through the flood, passing wreckage and clutching tree limbs, inching closer to the battered home where Sable waited, every moment a test of the team's nerves and skills. Elena's mind raced. She remembered the training, how to approach a frightened animal, how to move slow, keep your voice low, and never break eye contact. But this wasn't a barn or a controlled environment. This was a disaster zone, and every move carried risk. As they drew near, the roof came into clearer view. Sable was hunched at the peak, sides heaving, legs splayed for balance. Her eyes rolled white at the sound of the approaching motor. The boat bumped softly against the eaves, and Elena reached for a grappling hook, steadying the boat with practiced ease. Josie whispered, "What if she jumps?" "She won't," Elena replied, her words more confident than she felt. "She's exhausted. She's looking for help. She just doesn't know it yet." Elena climbed from the boat, boots slipping on the slick roof. She moved slowly, hands out, body low, murmuring in a soft, steady rhythm. "Hey there, easy girl. I'm not here to hurt you. I know you're scared. I know." Sable's head snapped around, nostrils flaring, legs quivering. Elena could see the animal's terror as clearly as if it were her own. She inched forward, never taking her eyes off the Mustang. Behind her, Marcus readied a coil of rope. Josie prepared a makeshift harness, but Elena waved them back. Too soon, too sudden, and the horse would panic. The roof creaked, the water sloshed around the house's foundation, but Elena's focus was absolute. Inch by inch, she closed the distance, speaking gently, letting Sable catch her scent, her presence. The horse shook, side-eyeing the unfamiliar human. Elena reached into her jacket pocket, withdrawing slices of apple, holding them out on her open palm. Rain trickled off her hand, the fruit glistening in the pale daylight. For a tense, endless moment, Sable hesitated, frozen between flight and surrender. Then, as another gust of wind rattled a broken window, she took a faltering step forward, drawn by hunger and exhaustion. She sniffed Elena's hand, lips quivering, muscles twitching beneath her coat. Elena barely breathed. Behind her, Marcus and Josie watched, silent and wide-eyed. No one moved. In that fragile pause, the valley seemed to hold its breath. The Mustang took the apple, teeth brushing Elena's fingers. Relief rushed through her. She dropped another slice onto the shingles. Sable gobbled it up, sides still heaving, but the wild fear in her eyes softened, just a little. Elena crouched beside her, talking in a low, even voice, the storm forgotten. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're going to get you out of here, I promise. You're not alone." And for the first time since the flood tore her world apart, Sable let herself believe it might be true. Rain still tapped at the battered shingles as the morning wore on, but the worst of the storm had passed, leaving a hushed, uneasy silence over the drowned valley. The water had stopped rising, but it churned below, thick with debris and secrets. From their unlikely perch, Elena and Sable seemed suspended in time, an island of fragile hope in a sea of ruin. For a long while, Elena just sat beside the trembling Mustang, careful not to reach for her too quickly. Her jacket was soaked through, but she ignored the discomfort, focusing on the subtle ways Sable's muscles bunched and relaxed, the delicate flicker of her ears, the shallow rise and fall of her chest. It was a dance Elena knew well, reading fear, waiting out panic, letting trust build one breath at a time. "Easy, girl," Elena murmured, voice as gentle as she could make it. "You're safe right now. Just you and me, up here above the mess. I promise I'm not going anywhere." Sable flinched at every distant shout or metallic clang carried across the water. Sometimes she shifted her weight so suddenly that Elena's heart leapt, but the Mustang never lunged or tried to escape. The exhaustion was too deep, Her legs still shook from the ordeal, and every time her eyes closed, her head would snap up, alert and wary. Elena knew that look, a creature too tired to stand, too scared to rest. The apple slices helped. Each time Elena offered one, she did it the same way, slowly, palm up, body low, speaking in soft encouragement. The first few times, Sable only sniffed, retreating from the offered fruit as if it might bite her. But hunger was a powerful force, and little by little, she accepted Elena's peace offering. Every bite taken, every hesitant nuzzle, was another thread in the growing bond between them. As the day crawled forward, rescue activity faded around them. Most boats had moved on to other homes, searching for people still stranded or trying to clear the main road for emergency vehicles. Now and then, a drone buzzed overhead, cameras scanning for survivors, but Sable barely noticed. Her world had shrunk to this rooftop, to the strange but soothing human beside her. Elena glanced at her watch. Afternoon. Time lost all meaning in the aftermath of disaster, but she knew that backup, real animal rescue specialists with proper equipment, would come eventually. Until then, it was just her and the Mustang, two survivors sharing a moment of wary peace. She pulled a thermal blanket from her kit, draping it loosely across her own shoulders, careful not to spook Sable. "You're a tough one," Elena whispered, more to herself than to the horse. "You made it through the worst of it. You just need to hang on a little longer." A sharp noise, a piece of siding clattering down the flooded street, sent Sable's head jerking up, her body tensed, ready to bolt. But Elena quickly reached out, not to touch, but to ground her own presence. "Hey, easy. It's just the wind, sweetheart. You're okay. You're okay." The storm's aftermath brought other challenges. The roof was slick, and Elena had to shift her position often to avoid sliding. Once she nearly lost her balance and had to stifle a laugh, not wanting to frighten Sable further. "We make a funny pair, don't we?" she said softly. "A wild Mustang and an old firefighter, both washed up by the same storm." As dusk crept closer, the temperature dropped. Sable's coat fluffed against the chill, her sides still shuddering now and then. Elena risked moving a little closer, humming a low, soothing tune she used to calm frightened pets during fire rescues. She didn't know if Sable understood, but the horse's ears twitched in her direction, and for a brief, magical moment, she stopped shaking. Thunder rumbled far off, but no new rain fell. Instead, the sky slowly began to clear, revealing a patch of fading blue and the first blush of evening stars. The valley's chaos faded into the background, replaced by the intimate, almost sacred stillness of two souls weathering the aftermath together. Elena's thoughts wandered, as they often did in moments of crisis. She remembered her own nights of fear, waiting for help that might not come, holding her breath through pain and loss. Those memories made her words for Sable softer, more honest. "Sometimes, you just need someone to sit with you until morning," she whispered, voice breaking only a little. "That's what I'm here for, girl. I won't leave you." Time passed slowly. The distant wail of sirens came and went. The water level seemed to recede by a hair's breadth, but neither dared hope for escape yet. Sable's head drooped, and Elena saw the wild light in her eyes flicker with exhaustion. For the first time, the Mustang leaned her weight a little toward Elena, seeking the warmth of another living soul. They waited like that as night settled over the broken valley, sharing breath and body heat, two survivors bound by silent agreement. On a roof no one was meant to stand on, in the aftermath of disaster, something rare and beautiful was being born. Trust, built from the wreckage, and when the wind died down, leaving only the sound of Sable's gentle breathing and Elena's steady humming, it felt, for a few precious hours, like hope might just survive the flood after all. Dawn in the valley came quietly, almost shyly, after a night so full of terror, it felt impossible that the world could ever be gentle again. The sky was pale, streaked with faded lavender and gold, the kind of sunrise that whispers instead of shouts. For Elena and Sable, the night had passed in a slow battle against fear and exhaustion. By the time the first rays crept over the flooded roofs, both survivor and rescuer had found a rhythm. Breaths in sync, nerves frayed, but hearts stubbornly beating. Elena's hands were stiff with cold as she finally stood and stretched, careful not to slip or startle the Mustang who rested beside her. The water below had receded just a little, revealing the devastation in sharper detail. Trees were upended, the tops of fences stuck out of the murky brown like gravestones, and debris choked every corner of the valley. Even so, the sight of daylight was a balm, a promise that their nightmare might, at last, be ending. She gently brushed a piece of debris from Sable's mane, murmuring softly, "Look at that girl. Sun's up. You made it through the night." Sable blinked slowly, her eyes softer than they had been since the chaos began. The fear wasn't gone, but it was no longer the only thing inside her. Something new had taken root, something like trust. From the riverbank, distant voices echoed across the water. The animal control team had arrived at last, hauling gear and a large animal rescue harness onto a battered rescue boat. Elena straightened, waving her arms to catch their attention, her relief sharp and sudden. They motored across the broken landscape, their red vests bright against the destruction. Behind them, a small crowd of neighbors and volunteers gathered on higher ground, watching in breathless anticipation. The team called out, "We've got the harness and a flotation sling. You all right up there?" Elena nodded, shouting back, "We're both alive, but she's wild and scared. Move slow, she trusts me, but not strangers." Animal control leader, a no-nonsense woman named Carla, sized up the scene as the boat bumped gently against the edge of the roof. "We'll follow your lead, Elena. Just keep talking to her." The process was painstaking. Carla tossed Elena one end of the harness, showing her how to loop it over Sable's shoulders. Every move was slow and deliberate, every sound calculated not to spook the traumatized Mustang. Elena kept her body between Sable and the strange faces, murmuring words of comfort as she slipped the harness into place. Sable shuddered, eyes wide, but she did not bolt. Her trust in Elena was stronger than her terror, for the moment. Twice Sable flinched as a rescuer's boot scraped the roof, threatening to snap the thread of calm they'd worked so hard to weave. Elena never raised her voice. She reached for another apple slice, holding it out as a distraction. "Easy, girl. Remember me? You're safe. Almost done." It was Elena's steady presence, her calm touch, that made the impossible possible. Inch by inch, she coaxed Sable into the harness, tightening the straps with hands that barely trembled. With the team's careful guidance, they attached the sling to the flotation device. Carla gave a signal, and together, they began the delicate process of sliding Sable toward the edge of the roof. For a terrifying moment, the Mustang hesitated, hooves scrabbling against the slippery shingles. The crowd on the shore gasped. The team froze, but Elena just kept whispering, her voice a rope to cling to in the storm-tossed world. "You can do this. I'm right here. I won't let go." Finally, with a deep, shuddering breath, Sable trusted Elena one more time. She allowed herself to be guided off the roof, into the makeshift harness. The sling dipped, water swirling around Sable's legs. But she did not panic. Instead, she looked back at Elena, as if searching for reassurance. Elena was right beside her, never letting go of the rope. The rescue boat bobbed and spun as they maneuvered Sable alongside, keeping her head above water, keeping her calm. The team paddled hard, sweat pouring down their faces despite the morning chill, determined not to let the mare slip away. On shore, neighbors cheered and clapped, their voices carrying across the water. Some held up phones to film the moment. Others simply watched, hands pressed over their hearts. In the midst of all the devastation, this rescue became a symbol, proof that something good could still be salvaged from disaster. As the boat finally touched dry land, Sable staggered but did not fall. Elena stayed with her, stroking her neck, whispering encouragement, tears stinging her eyes. The Mustang's legs wobbled, her body drenched and trembling, but she stood tall beside her rescuer. Volunteers rushed in with blankets and dry towels, offering water and gentle hands. The animal control team exchanged high fives, grins spreading across their tired faces. Even Carla, the tough leader, allowed herself a smile. "Never seen anything like it," she said, voice husky. "That horse would have never come down if it wasn't for you, Elena." Elena just shook her head, eyes never leaving Sable. She did all the work. She just needed someone to believe in her. As the sun climbed higher, painting the ruined valley in hopeful gold, Sable and Elena stood together, symbols of survival, trust, and the fragile bond that can form in the unlikeliest of places. In that moment, surrounded by strangers, both woman and horse found something they hadn't dared hope for, a reason to believe in new beginnings. The valley was still reeling in the aftermath of the flood, its people and animals scattered and battered by forces they could never have prepared for. As the morning sun dried puddles and glinted off broken glass, Elena stayed beside Sable, the Mustang who had survived the storm on sheer will and trust. For the first time since the water came, Elena felt hope bloom in her chest. Sable was safe. For now. The animal control truck rumbled up the hill to the makeshift shelter hastily erected at the edge of town, on ground that had stayed mercifully dry. Sable was led off the trailer, every step uncertain. The chaos of the journey, the clang of metal doors, the unfamiliar scent of disinfectant and other frightened animals, all of it seemed to close in around her. She jerked away from strangers, eyes rolling with panic. Only Elena's voice, low and steady, kept her from bolting as they moved her to a shaded pen behind the main tent. The shelter bustled with volunteers, neighbors with blankets, veterinarians checking livestock, teenagers ferrying water buckets. Sable pressed herself against the far end of her pen, refusing the fresh hay and carrots left for her. Her sides heaved, nostrils flaring as she scanned for escape. Elena stood outside the fence, worry etched into every line of her weathered face. "Give her a minute," Elena told the young volunteer who tried to coax Sable with a handful of grain. "She's been through hell. Let her come around on her own time." Inside, officials in crisp uniforms conferred over paperwork and laptops, radioing back and forth about missing pets and livestock reunions. The shelter was chaos, but an undercurrent of tension crackled the air when the county animal control supervisor strode in. Her name was Diane Fisher, and she moved with the air of someone used to giving orders and getting results. She surveyed the pen, Sable's shivering body, and then Elena. "We appreciate what you did," Diane said briskly, "but this horse is still a wild animal. By state regulations, she needs to be transported to the government holding facility in Carson by tomorrow. She'll be evaluated, quarantined, and, if she's healthy, may be released to a sanctuary." Elena bristled, stepping forward. She's just survived a flood. She's traumatized. If you move her now, she might never recover. You saw how she was on that roof. She only trusts me. Let me help her transition somewhere safe." Diane shook her head. "I can't make exceptions. If we start bending rules, people get hurt. We're responsible if anything happens. I'll need to file the transfer order this afternoon." As the supervisor left, Elena's resolve hardened. She turned to Sable, her mind racing. There had to be another way. Outside the tent, she pulled out her phone, hands trembling. Over the years, Elena had made plenty of friends in the animal welfare world. Rescue workers, sanctuary owners, even a journalist or two who owed her a favor. She dialed the director of the Nevada Mustang Sanctuary, explaining Sable's ordeal and the looming threat of a government holding pen. "We'll take her, no question," the director replied, her voice fierce. "But you know the red tape. She needs a waiver, or at least a judge's order." Elena's next call was to local news. Within the hour, the story hit social media. Hero firefighter saves wild Mustang from rooftop flood. The post included a video clip of Sable trembling on the roof, Elena beside her in the rain, both of them battered but unbowed. Comments and shares multiplied as the morning wore on. The hashtag #SaveSable began to trend. People from across the county posted photos of Sable and Elena, urging the authorities to let the horse stay in the area and recover in peace. At the shelter, volunteers joined the campaign. One set up a change.org petition, "Let Sable Stay," which quickly gathered hundreds of signatures. School children drew pictures of the Mustang and taped them to the pen, their bright colors a counterpoint to the drab canvas walls. The shelter became a hub of advocacy, strangers united by hope and anger at bureaucratic indifference. Despite the growing support, Sable remained agitated. She refused every offer of food and would only approach Elena, nickering softly when the woman appeared, retreating if anyone else came near. Her muscles quivered from fatigue, and her eyes grew duller as the afternoon wore on. Elena knelt outside the fence, whispering, "You're not alone, girl. Not anymore. We're going to fight for you." Tension ratcheted higher when state officials arrived to assess the shelter's flood recovery response. Their suits and briefcases clashed with the mud-stained boots and worn jeans of the volunteers. Diane presented her paperwork, and whispers spread that the transfer van would arrive at sunrise. Elena confronted the officials, voice shaking with a mix of fear and fury. "She's more than a case number," Elena insisted. "You can't send her off like lost property. Let her stay. Let her heal with people she trusts." A tall man from the governor's office looked uneasy, glancing at the swelling crowd outside the tent, the reporters, the signs. "We're reviewing options," he said, but Elena saw the hesitation in his eyes. That night, as Sable lay trembling in her pen and Elena sat in the dust outside, the fate of a wild Mustang rested in the hands of strangers, the outcome uncertain. But Elena was determined. Sable had survived the flood. She would not let her lose the fight for freedom. Morning broke with a ripple of anticipation running through the makeshift animal shelter. The sun, bright and fierce over the Nevada Valley, glinted off the parking lot packed with news vans and television crews. Reporters in windbreakers paced the perimeter, clutching microphones and notepads, their lenses trained on the temporary pens, and most of all, on the solitary figure of Sable and the woman who refused to leave her side. It had taken less than 24 hours for Sable's story to outgrow the boundaries of the shelter. Elena's old firefighting friends, local animal advocates, and even the parents of school children who had watched the viral video all found ways to amplify the message. By sunrise, Sable's rescue was front-page news. "Mustang saved from rooftop flood, now fights for freedom." Social media buzzed with photos, hashtags, and calls to action. The story had hit a nerve. When Elena arrived that morning, she was greeted not only by the familiar faces of volunteers and shelter staff, but by a throng of new supporters. A group of kids from a nearby elementary school arrived in yellow rain boots and carried signs with slogans like, "Let Sable Stay" and "Compassion over Bureaucracy." Their teacher beamed as the students lined the fence, pressing apples through the bars and whispering encouragements to the trembling mare. Elena's phone vibrated constantly with notifications, messages from strangers offering sanctuary space, donations, or simply words of encouragement. A local bakery sent boxes of pastries for the volunteers. The city's animal hospital pledged free veterinary care for Sable and any other displaced creatures from the flood. In the midst of all this, Elena tried to keep her focus on Sable, who was still wary, eating only when Elena was near, flinching at every loud noise. As news crews set up their cameras, the shelter became a circus of energy and hope, tinged with anxiety. Volunteers worked the crowd, handing out flyers and managing interview requests. Elena was pulled aside by a tall, no-nonsense producer from a regional news station. "Can you go live with us at 10?" she asked, scanning her clipboard. "We'd love to have you share your story. Just speak from the heart. The governor's office is watching." Elena hesitated, glancing at Sable, who was pressed against the far corner of the pen, eyes flicking warily between the crowd and the sky. "I'll do it if you promise to make Sable's future the focus, not mine." The producer nodded. And just after 10, Elena found herself standing in front of a bank of cameras. The sun was hot on her back, but her voice was calm and steady. She recounted the flood, the desperate hours on the roof, and the fragile trust that had grown between her and the terrified Mustang. Her words were raw and honest. "We don't get many second chances in life. Sable survived a disaster. She deserves a chance to heal, not more trauma. She deserves freedom." The interview aired live. Within minutes, the segment was clipped and shared across platforms. Viewers called in to offer their support or recount stories of their own rescues and wild horses. The comments section overflowed with words of solidarity and outrage, directed squarely at the officials who insisted on moving Sable to a government holding pen. The groundswell of support was impossible to ignore. A local animal rights attorney showed up with a thick folder of case law and a team of paralegals. "We're going to file for an emergency injunction," she promised Elena. "If they try to take Sable tonight, they'll have to go through us first." Meanwhile, the shelter staff struggled to manage the outpouring of donations. Bales of hay, medical supplies, and envelopes of cash arrived in a steady stream. A popular animal sanctuary 2 states away offered to fly in their equine behaviorist to evaluate Sable and assist with her transition, should she be allowed to leave government custody. Amid the flurry, Elena noticed Sable slowly responding to the steady presence of friends and advocates. The mare's trembling eased when children read stories to her through the fence or sang lullabies while volunteers mucked out the pens. She sniffed at the flowers tied to the gate and nickered softly when Elena offered her a fresh apple. By early afternoon, a breakthrough came. State officials, who had been monitoring the situation from afar, finally reached out. A junior representative from the governor's office arrived quietly and asked Elena to step aside for a private conversation. "We've seen the coverage," he said, his voice careful but not unfriendly. "There's a lot of public interest in this case and, well, to be honest, our phone lines are flooded. If you and the sanctuary director can provide immediate documentation and guarantee regulated care for Sable, we might be able to fast-track a transfer, pending legal review." Elena's heart soared. She called the director, who quickly sent over the sanctuary's credentials, veterinary certifications, and a detailed transition plan. The representative assured Elena, "No promises, but this is how exceptions happen. Keep the story in the public eye. By dusk, Elena returned to Sable's pen to find a cluster of volunteers holding hands and praying quietly. Others posted the latest update online. State officials considering compassionate release. Keep up the pressure. The sense of unity, of community standing up for one voiceless survivor, was overwhelming. As the sky deepened into indigo, Elena leaned against the fence, feeling the exhaustion and the hope crash over her at once. "You're almost there, girl," she whispered to Sable, who turned and pressed her nose against Elena's hand, the beginnings of peace shining in her wild, dark eyes. Word of Sable's ordeal had swept through the region like the floodwaters themselves. By the time the county announced a public hearing to decide her fate, the story had become more than one mare's struggle for survival. It was a test of what kind of community the valley wanted to be. The hearing was scheduled in the high school auditorium, the largest space that could be found on short notice, and as Elena walked toward the building with Sable's file clutched in her hands, the parking lot was already overflowing with cars and camera crews. The air was charged with anticipation. School children clustered near the doors, holding up their drawings of Sable and chanting, "Let her stay! Let her stay!" Volunteers wore matching T-shirts printed overnight, a silhouette of a wild Mustang standing proud against a backdrop of swirling floodwaters. Animal advocates, sanctuary workers, and ranchers all mingled in the entryway, setting aside their usual differences for the sake of the horse that had come to symbolize their own resilience and hope. Elena's steps slowed as she entered the crowded auditorium. She caught sight of familiar faces, neighbors who had watched her grow up, firefighters she'd once commanded, the volunteers who had stayed up all night on rescue missions. Their nods and quiet words of encouragement gave her strength. Still, she couldn't help but feel the weight of expectation pressing on her shoulders. The front rows were reserved for officials, including Diane Fisher from Animal Control and a panel of county supervisors. Reporters jostled for space along the aisles, microphones poised. On stage, a lectern stood beneath the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. The chairwoman banged her gavel. "This hearing will come to order. Today we will hear arguments regarding the disposition of a wild Mustang mare rescued during the recent flooding disaster." Diane spoke first, presenting the legal side. By regulation, all unclaimed or unbranded wild equines recovered in disaster zones must be transported to a state holding facility for quarantine and review. This is to ensure public safety and animal welfare. She kept her tone formal, but her eyes flickered to the crowd, aware, perhaps, of how outnumbered she was. Next came the expert testimony. The director of the Nevada Mustang Sanctuary took the stage, reading from detailed reports. Sable displays clear signs of trauma, but also strong social instincts and the ability to bond with humans. Relocating her to a holding pen risks irreparable psychological damage. Our sanctuary is licensed, regulated, and staffed by professionals with decades of experience in equine rehabilitation. We are prepared to assume full responsibility for her care and integration with a herd of rescued Mustangs. The attorney representing the Animal Welfare Coalition followed, citing legal precedent for waivers in extraordinary circumstances. She handed the panel a thick stack of signatures, over 10,000 collected online, and evidence of Sable's public support. Community engagement is a vital component of modern animal welfare. The overwhelming response to Sable's story demonstrates not only public investment, but a call for compassionate governance. As the chairwoman called Elena to speak, the auditorium hushed. Elena took a breath, searching for the words that would do justice to the sleepless nights, the terror on the rooftop, and the fragile trust she'd built with the Mustang now depending on her. She was just a wild horse, fighting for her life like the rest of us, Elena began, voice steady but trembling at the edges. But when I climbed onto that roof, I saw more than just fear. I saw hope. Hope that someone might do right by her, even when it was hard, even when the rules said otherwise. She recounted the hours of sitting in the cold, coaxing Sable to eat, whispering comfort as rain battered them from above. Sable survived a disaster, but if we treat her like a case number, she won't survive what comes next. She needs stability, not more cages. She needs people who understand her trauma and can help her heal. I'm asking you, not just as officials, but as neighbors and human beings, to grant her this chance. A wave of applause broke over the auditorium as she stepped down. The chairwoman pounded her gavel, calling for order, but the emotion in the room could not be contained. The final speakers were brief: a school principal whose students had rallied for Sable, a local veterinarian who vouched for her physical health and growing resilience, and even a rancher who admitted he'd always thought wild horses were trouble, but had changed his mind after witnessing the outpouring of compassion. Debate on the panel was heated and tense, with legal caution weighed against public sentiment and expert recommendations. After nearly an hour, the chairwoman called for a vote. We, the county board, find that under the extraordinary circumstances surrounding the rescue and recovery of this animal, and given the overwhelming community support, expert testimony, and sanctuary arrangements in place, we hereby grant a one-time compassion waiver. Sable will be released into the care of the Nevada Mustang Sanctuary, under continued observation and regulation. The auditorium erupted. Cheers, hugs, even a few tears. Elena felt her knees weaken with relief. Diane from Animal Control extended a hand, this time not in authority, but in genuine respect. You did good, Carter. You all did. As the room emptied, children pressed against Elena, asking if they could visit Sable one day, offering crumpled drawings and even friendship bracelets for the bravest horse in Nevada. Outside, the sun was sinking low, casting golden light on a town forever changed by the flood and the fight for one wild mare's freedom. That night, as Elena finally rested for the first time in days, she knew the real work was just beginning. But for the first time, she believed that kindness, backed by action, courage, and the voices of a community, could truly change the world. The journey to the Nevada Mustang Sanctuary took most of the day, winding up from the battered town through golden foothills and quiet, rolling valleys. Sable traveled in a custom trailer lined with straw, accompanied by Elena and a gentle-eyed vet who murmured encouragement at every turn. Though the ride was bumpy and strange smells filtered through the vents, Sable's wild eyes no longer showed the whites quite so much. She watched Elena through the bars, nostrils twitching, and whenever Elena hummed or spoke softly, the Mustang's body would relax, if only for a moment. The sanctuary itself was a world away from the chaos of flood and shelter. Acres of sunlit pasture stretched beneath a sky so blue it felt like forgiveness. Corrals were wide, gates sturdy but open, and a small herd of rescued Mustangs grazed on fresh grass beyond a tree-lined fence. A crisp, pine-scented breeze drifted over the land. Volunteers and staff gathered by the main barn, their smiles tired but genuine, and everyone kept their voices low and movements slow. Elena had worried about the transition, about how Sable would react to new sights, new horses, and people she didn't know. But the sanctuary's director, a silver-haired woman named June, greeted them with a warmth that was almost tangible. "You both made it," she said, hugging Elena before leading her and Sable into the quiet shade of the intake corral. "Let's take our time." The staff's gentle approach paid off. They waited while Sable stood at the gate, ears swiveling, nostrils flaring as she took in the scents and sounds of her new world. No one rushed her. Elena stayed by her side, murmuring encouragement and offering apple slices, just as she had on the rooftop and at the shelter. After a while, Sable stepped forward, one tentative hoof at a time, into the grass, and the herd in the adjoining pasture pricked up their heads, watching curiously but without threat. The next hours passed in a haze of cautious introductions and small victories. Sable allowed the sanctuary vet to inspect her hooves and brush out the dried mud from her coat. She nickered softly at the scent of another mare, and finally, tentatively, lowered her head to graze. Elena watched with tears pricking her eyes. This wild creature, battered and nearly lost, was taking her first steps toward peace. News of Sable's arrival had spread fast. Neighbors and volunteers who had followed her journey online came by to catch a glimpse of the Mustang who had survived the flood. Children from the local school brought painted signs, "Welcome home, Sable," and hung them on the fences. For every person who arrived, there was a story to share, a moment to relive, a new sense of purpose. The flood had taken much, but in Sable's survival, people found something to root for, something to believe in again. Elena, exhausted but elated, spent her first night in a guest room above the barn. She woke at dawn to the sound of horses nickering and the scent of hay. Her legs ached from days of tension, but her spirit felt light for the first time since the storm. After coffee, she joined June and the staff in the pasture, helping with the morning routine, feeding, mucking, watching Sable carefully for signs of stress. With every passing hour, Sable grew more at ease. She startled less when a bird flew up from the grass. She stood quietly while her new caretakers brushed her, only flinching if a movement was too sudden. When the rest of the herd approached the fence, Sable watched, then let one curious yearling touch noses with her through the rails. There was a soft, electric hush to the moment, a feeling that something deeply right was happening. As the days went by, Elena worked alongside the staff, helping to create a routine that would make Sable's transition gentle and trauma-informed. She helped plan enrichment activities, scattering treats through the pasture, arranging for Sable to have her own quiet space, and, in time, letting her join the others for short, supervised visits. Each successful introduction was a cause for quiet celebration. The wild light in Sable's eyes softened, replaced by a cautious curiosity. Elena found herself drawn into the life of the sanctuary too. June asked her to speak to volunteers about rescue work, and Elena's stories of firehouse calls, lost pets, and now a Mustang named Sable brought laughter and sometimes tears. Her bond with Sable became a kind of bridge, connecting people who might never have met otherwise. She helped organize a community open pasture day, inviting the public to learn about Mustangs, disaster response, and the long road of recovery after trauma. On the first open day, a crowd gathered at the fence, hopeful and eager. Sable, still tentative but growing bolder, trotted across the pasture with her new friends, her coat glossy in the sun. Elena stood with June, smiling as children pointed and whispered. Parents snapped photos, and reporters jotted down notes for the follow-up story. For everyone watching, Sable's presence was a reminder. Hope survives, even in the aftermath of disaster. That afternoon, as the last visitors left and dusk settled softly over the valley, Elena spent a few quiet minutes with Sable under the old sycamore by the fence line. She stroked the Mustang's neck, feeling the warmth and strength beneath her fingers. "You made it, girl," Elena whispered, tears shining in her eyes. "You're finally home." Behind them, the community celebrated, a moment of peace, of reunion and healing, with the promise of brighter days ahead. The weeks following Sable's rescue were a time of slow healing, not just for the Mustang, but for everyone who'd lived through the storm. The Nevada Valley, though still scarred, had begun to mend. Houses were patched, fences repaired, and the once muddy fields shimmered green beneath the spring sun. But the biggest changes weren't visible from the roadside. They happened in the hearts of those touched by Sable's story. Elena found herself at the center of a new movement, swept up in a tide of gratitude, curiosity, and quiet reckoning. At first, she'd thought she would simply stay at the sanctuary until Sable settled in, maybe a week or two. But June, the director, quickly realized Elena's gift for connecting with animals and people alike. She asked Elena to share her story, not just with the volunteers, but with the wider community. It started with a simple invitation, a visit to the local elementary school, where students had filled their hallways with drawings of Sable and letters of support. When Elena arrived, the children crowded around her, peppering her with questions. "What did the flood sound like?" one asked, eyes wide. "Were you scared on the roof?" asked another. Elena knelt, meeting their gaze. "It was loud, and yes, I was scared. But the most important thing is that we didn't give up. Sometimes being brave means being scared but showing up anyway, for someone who needs you." She told them how Sable, wild and frightened, had learned to trust her in the darkest hours. She described the long night on the roof, the gentle process of earning Sable's confidence, and how every act of kindness, every apple slice, every quiet word, had mattered. The students listened, spellbound. When the talk ended, one little girl pressed a hand-drawn thank you card into Elena's palm. "You helped Sable. I want to help animals too." Word spread, and soon Elena was invited to speak at the high school, the town council, and a series of community meetings on disaster preparedness. At each event, she wove Sable's journey into a larger message: courage, trust, and the necessity of second chances, not just for animals, but for people as well. Real rescue isn't just about saving a life in a moment of crisis, Elena told a crowded gymnasium, her voice steady and strong. It's about what comes after. It's about hope, dignity, and giving someone, or some creature, a future worth living for. We can't always control the storms that come our way, but we can control how we respond and who we choose to lift up along the way. The story struck a chord. Neighbors who'd barely spoken before now volunteered together at the sanctuary or in rebuilding efforts. Local ranchers, some who'd once grumbled about wild horses, offered donations of hay and time. Families organized disaster supply drives and fundraisers for emergency animal shelters. The entire valley, in subtle but important ways, became a little more connected, a little more compassionate. For Elena, the aftermath of the flood also brought personal growth. She'd spent years running from her own grief, losses she'd endured as a firefighter. The pain of family drifted away, the loneliness that sometimes gnawed at her on quiet nights. But something in Sable's resilience had shifted her perspective. She found herself journaling in the early mornings, her thoughts winding between memory and hope. She wrote about the first moment she'd met Sable's gaze, the fear in those wild eyes, and how it mirrored her own. She reflected on the healing that comes from patience, from simply being present, even when you don't know what to say or do. Sable, too, was growing. She'd become the unofficial leader of her little herd, gentle with new arrivals and fiercely protective of the weak. Her coat glistened with health. She no longer flinched at sudden noises, and the staff often saw her galloping across the pasture, tail high, a living emblem of freedom restored. When Elena approached the fence, Sable always came over, pressing her nose against Elena's outstretched hand, a silent acknowledgement of their unbreakable bond. One evening, as the sanctuary hosted a community open house, Elena stood at the edge of the pasture, watching Sable graze beneath the setting sun. June joined her, quiet for a moment before saying, "I've never seen a rescue touch so many people, Elena. You gave them something to believe in." Elena smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. "It was Sable who showed us how. She reminded me what it means to trust, what it means to keep going, even when the world falls apart." Their conversation turned to practical matters, new protocols for animal rescues, how to better prepare for future disasters, ways to include animal welfare in community planning. Elena helped draft proposals for more training and supplies, and even joined a committee dedicated to improving the valley's disaster response. Her experience with Sable became a case study, shared in meetings, workshops, and online guides, helping shape new policies for the region. But more than any policy or program, it was the story that lingered. The wild Mustang on the roof, the woman who refused to leave her behind, and the community that discovered its heart in the face of disaster. As spring faded into summer, Elena realized she'd found something she hadn't known she was searching for. Not just a cause or a job, but a sense of belonging, of purpose. The flood had changed everything, but out of loss had come a kind of rebirth, for Sable, for Elena, and for the valley itself. And in every classroom, every meeting, every quiet moment by the pasture, the lesson echoed on. Hope, given a second chance, can transform even the hardest trials into the beginning of something new. Months passed, and the Nevada Valley transformed with the season. Where there had once been mud and sorrow, wildflowers now painted the fields in shades of gold and violet. Fences were rebuilt, families returned, and new life took root everywhere. For Elena, each day at the sanctuary was a reminder of what had been lost and what had been saved. Sable thrived. Gone was the shaking, frightened mare from that storm-soaked rooftop. Now she led her small herd across sunlit pastures, her coat shining with health, her step proud and powerful. She was wary of strangers but never ran from them, and more than one new volunteer found themselves quietly awed by the Mustang's silent strength. Children who visited the sanctuary would watch her run, their cheers drifting on the warm wind. To them, Sable was a living symbol, proof that survival was possible, that fear could be transformed into something beautiful and wild. Elena visited the pasture every morning and evening, always stopping by the fence to share a few moments with Sable. Sometimes she'd bring an apple, laughing as Sable nuzzled her pockets. Sometimes Elena simply stood in the grass, watching Sable and her herd graze, feeling a peace she'd never known before the flood. The story of Sable's rescue never really faded. It was retold at coffee shops, at PTA meetings, in the local paper, and far beyond. Social media posts of her running with her herd would go viral every few weeks, always with a new caption about second chances and resilience. The community's compassion hadn't just saved one horse. It had left a permanent mark on everyone who'd taken part. Donations flowed in, enough to build new barns and expand the sanctuary. Rescue organizations from across the country reached out for advice, and the Nevada Valley became a model for animal welfare and disaster response. But for Elena, the greatest reward was quieter, a kind of gentle knowing that she had found her place in the world. She'd discovered a deeper truth about heroism, one that went beyond dramatic rescues and viral news. Real heroism, she'd learned, was in the persistence to keep fighting for the voiceless, even after the cameras turned away, even when hope felt impossible. It was in the daily work, the patience, the listening, the steady offering of trust and care. One afternoon, as cicadas sang and the sky shimmered with late summer heat, Elena was invited to speak at a regional animal welfare conference. She took the stage to a standing ovation, humbled by the faces looking up at her. Students, rescuers, farmers, teachers, and more. She didn't recite statistics or procedures. Instead, she told Sable's story, every hard and beautiful piece of it, from the chaos of the flood to the miracle of healing that followed. She finished with the message that had become her own. True heroism is fighting for the voiceless, even when the odds are against you. It's staying when everyone else leaves, listening when no one else hears, and believing in second chances for those the world would rather forget. Compassion and persistence can change not just one life, but a whole community. The audience rose again in applause, but it was the quiet nods and the shining eyes in the crowd that told Elena she'd reached them. Afterward, teachers asked her to visit their schools. Volunteers offered to join her next rescue. Local leaders discussed more changes to county policy, determined to ensure that no animal or person would be left behind the next time disaster struck. Back at the sanctuary, Elena's days settled into a pattern of meaningful, hopeful work. She mentored new volunteers, collaborated with June on outreach programs, and even helped design a memorial garden for the animals and people lost in the flood, a place for reflection, healing, and gratitude. Sable, too, became a teacher of sorts. She led new Mustangs with patience, her steady presence helping the most frightened animals adjust. Once, Elena saw a recently rescued filly trembling at the far edge of the field. Sable approached slowly, lowering her head and standing near until the filly's shaking eased, and the two walked off together into the tall grass. Watching that simple act of kindness, Elena's heart swelled with pride. Occasionally, Elena would pause by the garden at dusk, remembering those darkest moments on the rooftop, the rain, the fear, the stubborn thread of hope that had kept her going. She understood, more than ever, that life's greatest transformations often began at the edge of despair, that what mattered most was never giving up on yourself or on those in your care. The sanctuary flourished. Sable ran at the head of her herd, her mane streaming in the wind, every stride a celebration. Elena watched, sometimes laughing, sometimes with tears she no longer hid, feeling connected to something far larger than herself. The story was no longer just about a single horse or a single rescue. It was about community, courage, and the belief that even in a world full of loss, hope could always be found, nurtured, and unleashed. In her last public message about Sable's journey, Elena's words resonated far beyond the valley. If you believe in hope, in second chances, and in the wild spirit that lives in all of us, share this story. Stand up for those who need you most. You never know whose life you might save, or how your own might be changed. And so Sable's legacy lived on, not just in the grasslands of Nevada, but in every heart that chose to fight for hope, for freedom, and for the promise of a brighter tomorrow.